100, 200, 300 years ago from now, people are going to listen to our conversation here and they're going to be thinking, why were they even debating this?
Yeah.
Why were they even talking about people receiving pieces of paper for goods and services? Why were they giving away something that's finite in exchange for pieces of paper? It makes no sense. But that only comes once you actually understand what Bitcoin is. Realize that. And Bitcoin is the only asset that matters. Everything else is irrelevant. We're using stocks and real estate to save for the future, but all of those things are
That
leaking.
is for people who just like don't see how big of a deal hyperinflation is. This is when I was in Argentina, and it is showing this. These are two are equal amounts,
Well,
$220, and that's the Argentine peso version. So we went to an exchange, and it's literally you got the rubber bands. Each of these, there's 50 notes in each one of these. So I've got 200 notes. Each of those were worth at the time 50 cents each of
well,
those bills. So it's just like the complication of like we get all the cash and we're like, where do we hide it or what do we
for
do with it?
myself, I
And
was
so
writing
like the answer to the question is now a good time to buy Bitcoin or should you buy Bitcoin? And what I wrote
my God.
was,
So what the way that I think is that merchants are not going to want dollars because they know that dollars can be created out of nothing. Like, let's think of this logically. Bitcoin doesn't provide cash flows because it is the cash flow. You don't use Bitcoin to make money. Bitcoin is money. And that's something that a lot of people just can't wrap their heads around. They can't get it because they can't get away from the assumption that the world will use US dollars as money forever.
all right, welcome, Rajat. I'm so glad that you can join us. Love to talk to you today about Bitcoin and why it's freedom technology and how we can maybe use Bitcoin as a technology to help create our own reality.
Thank you so much for having me, Jeff. I'm looking forward to this.
Yeah, man. So it sounds like you, and correct me if I'm wrong here, I'd love to hear your background. Like you were in the traditional world as a financial advisor and had a big account, was growing, talking about that stuff, and then either discovered Bitcoin or decided you were going to talk about Bitcoin, and then your account took off or probably tanked initially and then took off later on. Is that right? Or did I miss anything?
No, that's exactly what happened. So in the beginning, I was talking about stocks, real estate, bonds, all the other stuff, gold. And at that time, I think so on Instagram, I reached a maximum of about 115, 120,000 followers. And at some point, I thought, I'm not talking about real estate anymore. I'm not talking about Bitcoin or about stocks anymore. I feel like that was my moment where I got orange pilled. I'd been studying Bitcoin for quite a long time. It took me at least 3 years, 2.5 to 3 years to really understand where it's going. Before that, I was buying some Bitcoin. So I started buying Bitcoin in 2022, around 40, 50,000 US. I don't remember what the exact numbers were, but around 40, 50,000 US. And at that point, I don't think I quite understood what Bitcoin was. I just thought of it as another asset. I've been on podcasts where I'm saying how Bitcoin doesn't compete with other assets, but the reality is, of course, over time, you keep learning about Bitcoin, you keep figuring out what it is, you keep um, you keep adding to your education and your knowledge, and you finally realize that Bitcoin is the only asset that matters. Everything else is irrelevant. We're using stocks and real estate to save for the future, but all of those things are leaking in a way. You have all these people that are extracting value from them. You have property taxes, you have executive salaries that you have to pay. You have to pay for research and development. Of course, those things are necessary. You need those things to invest in a company, to invest in a business. But if you don't have any way to save, then you're always investing in these things and you don't really have certainty. For example, if you're going to buy the S&P 500, people assume that it's going to grow at 10% per year, but there's no certainty. We have no idea whether or not the companies in the S&P 500 will continue to provide value. We have no idea whether or not people will continue to want our real estate. For example, we have the fires that happened. I believe it was where was it? In California?
Yeah, Las Vegas or
California?
Los Angeles.
Yeah, so all of those people who had rental properties there, all the people who had stored all of their value, all of their savings in those properties, they lost everything. Of course, they may be relying on insurance to pay them back, but your house is more than just money. There's a sentimental value involved. There's the fact that you built memories, of course, all that is included in sentimental value. But then there's also the fact that you have your stability, your security when you own that house. You know for a fact that, okay, I can come back to this place. This is my place where I live. But people have turned that into an investment. So a lot of people who just buy houses as investment properties. They're buying them in order to store their value for the future. They're not buying them for the utility of housing. They're not buying them because they want to live in those houses. And over time, more and more houses are being owned by investors and they're occupied by renters who don't actually care about those properties. So to me, I mean, over time, just the rabbit hole gets so deep. You just keep going, you just keep going. There's really no bottom, but you can keep going. You can keep learning more and more. And eventually, I think it's very hard to not come to the conclusion that Bitcoin is the only thing that really matters, the only asset that we should own. There's no point of owning other assets, especially while Bitcoin is giving you massive returns compared to those other assets. So for example, the S&P 500 is giving you 10, 12%. Why would you want to hold the S&P 500? You're taking on so much more risk. You're not guaranteed anything. You're holding your stock with somebody who's basically a custodian. They're holding it for you. If that custodian goes bankrupt, your stock is gone. If they do something wrong, your stock is gone. Of course, in the legacy financial system, you can print things out of nothing, so it's a little different. But on a Bitcoin standard, you don't have to rely on custodians. You can do all of that yourself. You take much less risk. You don't have to deal with counterparty risk, but at the same time, you get much higher returns. So what's the reason to hold all these other assets if you're getting a lower return and you're taking a higher risk?
Yeah, I love that. I was trying to get into real estate in 2018. I had a mentor and we were focused on small apartments, like 8 units to 40, and looking to do essentially like what you would flip a house, but with an apartment building because you get more leverage and you essentially add a zero on all the numbers as far as paychecks and whatnot. And I really wanted to, I was on the Bigger Pockets forum, like learning how to get into real estate investing, spent a lot of time going to meetups, things like that. At the time, I was like, in Utah, houses were about 400,000. And I was like trying to figure out how to come up with even 5% of the down payment. So even 20 grand. And I came to the conclusion that in this short term, it makes more sense to put my money into Bitcoin. And then that will allow me to afford the down payment. And then once I could afford the down payment, I was like, why would I swap this for a house? It
Yeah.
makes no sense. So now I'm wondering if it even makes sense to buy a home as opposed to, I mean, there's obviously like the sentimental value and the like planning for your family and it's yours type of thing. But for the short term, it seems like it makes more sense. And my strategy has been hold Bitcoin and rent nice Airbnbs. And so I'm curious if you were to like say buy a $500,000 house, and I don't know with rates exactly how much you would pay. I think like say it's like 2,500 is the mortgage or something like that. It seems like you'd do better holding Bitcoin and spending like 4 grand on rent or something like. Have you looked at the numbers to see like how you can actually own and rent a nicer house or spend more on rent yet come out ahead?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've been doing the numbers on this. I have a I have a spreadsheet that I created exactly on this topic. Let me actually find that. Oh,
How
here it is. I
incredible.
got it. I got it already. There you go. Okay, so in this spreadsheet, you can see that if you have a $125,000 down payment and you put that towards Bitcoin, you're going to get about 1.36 Bitcoin. This is based on the $92,000 price. But if you buy a house, let's say you buy a $625,000 house, you put down 20%. In 10 years, your house is going to give you, if the price rises at 4% per year, after leverage and all that stuff, after you pay off your mortgage, you're going to have about $506,000. That's if everything goes right. You're also not considering all of these fees. So you're not considering maintenance, repairs, property taxes. If you have a rental property, you're going to have to consider vacancies, insurance, you're going to have to consider your mortgage. So all of that stuff is still going to be coming out of your pocket. But at the same time, you're also putting down this $125,000 up front, which instead you could use to buy Bitcoin. If Bitcoin grows at 30% per year, and that's actually pretty conservative based on the numbers that we've seen so far. I think Bitcoin's returned about 70, 80% per year so far since inception. If it grows at 30% per year and you put $125,000 into Bitcoin, you get that 1.36 Bitcoin, you end up with 1.7 million So you're ahead of owning real estate by at least $1.26 million dollars. And keep in mind, of course, this isn't just, it doesn't account for everything. There are probably things here that I'm missing, but in general, you're probably going to be ahead by at least $1 million dollars if you just hold on to Bitcoin. If you were to rent a property and you just pay the rent on that every single month, I'm not saying that you shouldn't buy a house. I think a house is a lifestyle decision that everybody has to make for themselves. There's a lot of stability involved. For example, if you want to rent a place, let's say you want to get an Airbnb. Maybe you're moving every couple months, maybe every year, every couple years. Maybe you want to set roots in a house and you buy a house for that purpose. The good thing is that you can do that because the current financial system is built on fake money. You can use 80% of you can borrow 80% of the value of the house instead of having to pay for it up front. And I think this is partly the reason for why house prices just keep rising because of this fake money. More and more money keeps entering the economy, more and more money keeps entering the system. So people just want to hold on to houses. They don't want to sell them because they think that the value will go up forever. So if you do make the choice between buying a house and buying Bitcoin, I think you'd be better off buying Bitcoin. But again, there's certain things that you may want to consider for yourself. Let's say, for example, if you want to have the stability that comes with owning a house, maybe that's something that you need to consider. Maybe that's something that you need to add onto the scale on the side of the house, and that could actually give you a massive benefit. But if you were to just go with buying Bitcoin and you only look at the finances, you're going to be massively ahead. So I think, let's say you're in your 20s and you're looking to buy a house. I think you'd be much better off just owning Bitcoin because keep in mind that the entire world has not figured it out yet. I personally think that most people are going to ignore Bitcoin until it reaches $1 million or more, if not $10 million, dollars, if not $100 million. Most people are going to keep ignoring Bitcoin until then. And when the time comes that they actually realize what it is, they're going to want your Bitcoin and they're going to be willing to give you all of the rental properties, all of the real estate that you want in exchange for your Bitcoin. So right now, a house is costing about 4.5 Bitcoin. You can buy 1.36 Bitcoin with $125,000. At some point, this house is going to cost you zero point 0.1 Bitcoin. The whole thing. You're going to be able to pay zero point 0.1 Bitcoin to buy that house. So the value of the house is going to drop by at least 98, 97%. So over time, if you if you just go based on logic, if you just go based on math, I think it's hard to get away from Bitcoin's growth. It's hard to get away from the value that Bitcoin provides. If you were to own a lot more Bitcoin, I think you'd be much, much better off compared to owning a lot more houses.
I agree. And something that just hit me on the side of the face listening to Chris Johnson talk was the fact that when your house goes up, so does your interest and property taxes.
Yeah.
Something that nobody accounts for. And you look at, like, I was looking at how I'm looking at moving to Austin, Texas, and Texas has like over 2% property taxes. So I was just doing the math. I'm like, wow, if you own, even if it's just a $500,000 house, like you're paying at least, I'm not doing the math right now, we're very well in my head, but you're paying, what would that be? At least 10K, if not 12, just in property tax every single
Yeah.
year. And somebody did it like, you buy it in cash over the 30 years of owning the house, you're spending hundreds of thousands of dollars on property tax. And property tax isn't going down, in my opinion.
No,
So
it's not.
yeah, it's also incredible that Bitcoin, of course, has capital gains tax, but it doesn't have property tax. So just holding it and doing nothing, like the 80 IQ version of just like stack sats, stay humble, stack sats, and do nothing, is like, as long as you do that and you don't get into trading and don't get into like leverage and trying to like get rich or get rich quick, I should say, it seems like a no-brainer to me.
Yeah, absolutely. I
So
completely agree. I think over time, what's going to happen is Bitcoin's price is going to go up so much because people are just holding it. Because let's say, for example, you and me, we're not planning to sell our Bitcoin until it reaches a million, 5 million, $10 million. I don't plan to sell any. Until then, the thing is that the price is going to keep going up. And at that point, more and more people are going to want Bitcoin. So the way that the market works is if anybody just holds on to Bitcoin, they're going to be incentivized to sell it in the future in order to get whatever they want for it. Because the value of Bitcoin is going to go up so much, and the value of the things that we want is going to go down so much. not the value, the price. The price of Bitcoin is going to go up so much, and the price of everything else is going to go down so much. So we're going to be basically forced to give it away in order to sustain our lifestyle. Not really, actually, forced isn't the right way, but we're going to be incentivized to give it away in order to sustain our lifestyles and to do whatever we want in our day-to-day lives.
Absolutely. Yeah. So a lot of people have trouble with Bitcoin doesn't have cash flow. I know that I shared when we had I paid you for a consult call to verify, like, am I missing anything? Like, I wanted to talk to a financial advisor who understands Bitcoin. And I showed, like, I used a conservative compound annual growth rate of, I think, 55%. And I was like, so you can actually sell with the model I had. It started off selling $2,000 per month every month for a year, and then $3,000 every month for a year, and then $4,000 every month for a year. And even though you're slightly depleting the principal of Bitcoin, your principal in dollar terms is going up, and you have a cash flow that comes off. And
Yeah.
so it's not a traditional cash flow in the sense of, like, it's not paying you something to own it, but it is cash flow in the sense of you can sell some for cash flow. And even with capital gains tax, and even with the fact that you're selling some of the scarcest asset that you ideally never want to sell, you're still getting wealthier while receiving cash flow.
Yeah,
So,
yeah. I actually created a compound interest calculator for this. If anybody wants to go to my YouTube channel, you can just check any video. I have it in the description. But essentially, the compound interest calculator shows you, based on your cash flows, based on the amount of money that you need to spend on a daily basis, how much your Bitcoin needs to grow, how much money you need to put towards Bitcoin, and then let's say 10 years from now, you can start seeing whether or not your Bitcoin will fulfill your cash flow needs. So let me actually share again. I'm going to share my screen just because I feel like this is such an important tool. So let's say, for example, if you were to invest in the stock market to live in, so these are the monthly expenses to live in New York for a single person. I think these might be low by now, but let's say, for example, if you wanted to live in New York and you wanted to have, sorry, no, this isn't New York. This is New York. This is New York with the stock market. So if you had $8,848 per month going into your investment fund, you'd be able to retire in New York in 10 years by 2035. On the other hand, if Bitcoin grows at 40% per year, instead of putting $8,848 towards your investment portfolio, you only need to put down, or you only need to invest $427 per month into Bitcoin to get the same result, the exact same result. So based on what you were saying, you can increase the amount of money that you withdraw every single month, every single year, and your portfolio is going to sustain itself because the growth is going to be so much faster than the current financial system. In the current financial system, of course, we get 8 to 10% returns. On Bitcoin, you're going to get, I would say you're going to get 20 to 40% returns over the next 10 to 12 years. If you get 20% returns, let's say you wanted to have $7,753 of expenses paid off every single month, you can invest $2,734 into Bitcoin at 20% returns. If there's a 30% return, you can put away $1,079 per month into Bitcoin at 30% to get $7,753 every single month out of your portfolio from 2035 and onwards. At 40%, again, $427 per month. So the numbers are just crazy compared to 8,000 sorry, $8,000 per month being invested, you only have to invest $400. So you're investing 5%. Like that just blows my mind. Just thinking about that, thinking that you need to put so much less towards your retirement to have the same lifestyle as somebody who's investing in stocks, it's a no-brainer at this point.
yeah. Now, unit bias really throws people off in them thinking that they missed it, especially people who have, everybody goes and says, man, if 10 years ago I would have put $1,000 into there, it would have been worth, eight something million. And it's like, well, first off, you probably would have lost it, or you would have stored it on an exchange like Mt. Gox or FTX that went bankrupt and took your coins, or whatever the case is. But the thing is, if you see that and you still own zero, you're missing the point. Like, there's a really good book. I don't know who the author was, but it's called 100 Baggers. I don't know if you've ever read it, but it was basically just
I haven't read it, but I've heard of it.
it's basically just showing that the best investors are dead. because they never were able to sell. Because they never sold, they just held. Like if it's just like you pick the winner and you hold it forever and you're set.
Yeah.
And so when we see a winner and it's very clear that this is the winner, then why wouldn't you let it ride? And sure, you could take your initial investment out. Sure, you could, start looking to take sell small amounts so you have cash flow or dividends or whatever the case is. But it's it's mind-boggling to me. I think it's ego. Why do you think it is that smart people, because like Silicon Valley tech people, and other people who are otherwise smart, it seems like they've just done zero research or they've just read headlines and they just fall for some of the FUD that's out there. Why do you think it is that some people just like can't get it?
I made a video about this for Warren Buffett, how Warren Buffett says it's rat poison, it's going to zero, it's going to have a terrible end. I think the main reason is that people are using the wrong metrics to measure Bitcoin. So what they're doing is they're going based on the same metrics that they would use to value stocks, to value real estate, to value all these other assets. But Bitcoin is completely different. You can't value Bitcoin like you would stocks and real estate. I think that's the main reason why a lot of the wealthiest investors aren't figuring it out yet because, like you said, they don't understand the cash flow. They don't understand that over time, Bitcoin is a network asset. On stocks, for example, you need a company that provides a service that continues to provide that service, and you need customers that continue to want that service. So with Bitcoin, it's a little bit different. Bitcoin doesn't provide a service, it doesn't provide a good. There's no executive team, there's nobody making decisions on your behalf. All you're doing is you're holding on to this thing in order to store value for the future. And I think that's what really people don't get. People don't get that because they want something that does something with their money. So they say, "Oh, I've gotten this comment. I'm sure you've gotten this comment too. But what does it do? What do I do with it when I hold it? You don't do anything. You just hold it. That's it. It's as simple as that. But people don't want simple. They want complicated. They want things to be as complicated as possible so that they feel like they're doing something when, I mean, really, you're not. You can continue to research stocks. You can continue to look at profit and loss. You can continue to look at cash flows, balance sheets, income statements. You can continue to do that. But regardless of how great you are at looking at all that information, all those numbers, somebody sitting in their basement owning one Bitcoin will outperform you forever. And that there's even a question of that. At some point, somebody like Warren Buffett, who doesn't understand Bitcoin right now, let's say his company is worth. I was doing the numbers on this. At one point, his company was worth 30 million Bitcoin. Today, his company's worth 10 million Bitcoin. Over time, it's going to drop to 5, 3, 1, 100,000, 50,000, 20,000. If they don't adopt Bitcoin, the value that they have is going to continue to drop. And they're not seeing it from this perspective. They're seeing it from the perspective that we need something that provides cash flows. And Bitcoin is the cash flow. Bitcoin doesn't provide cash flows because it is the cash flow. You don't use Bitcoin to make money. Bitcoin is money. And that's something that a lot of people just can't wrap their heads around. They can't get it because they can't get away from the assumption that the world will use US dollars as money forever.
I still think that US dollar is going to last a long time and be the medium of exchange, and that Bitcoin will be like the where you save your money. What's really interesting is that this whole need for investing and people spending time trying to multiply their money is only needed because our currency is getting debased constantly. And so it's like a fiat mentality or an old world mentality of I need to outrun the rate of inflation. And because you can't obviously store cash under a mattress or wherever, otherwise it's going to lose purchasing power. But this is the first time we've had a technology since gold, basically, that, and even gold has not performed very well, but we've had a technology that actually stores your purchasing power and you don't have to do anything, which is
Yeah.
wild. And people just want, I think that it's so hard for people to just sit and do nothing.
Yeah, I agree with you. I don't agree with that first part. I don't think that we're going to be using the US dollar for I mean in the short term maybe, but in the current capacity, I don't think we're going to be using the US dollar for a very long time because the US dollar can be created out of thin air. So let's think of it this way. You go to a merchant and your merchant understands Bitcoin. If they accept Bitcoin, they're probably going to trade it for something as soon as they possibly can. They're going to, or they're going to receive dollars and they're going to give it away to maybe accept Bitcoin, maybe to what the way that I think is that merchants are not going to want dollars because they know that dollars can be created out of nothing. Like, let's think of this logically. Why would somebody who produces oil, who puts time, energy, resources, and effort into producing oil, who's mastered these techniques of taking oil out of the ground and refining it, why would they want something that can be created out of nothing? I think over time, this is going to shift. I think right now it just seems normal that we accept pieces of paper for our value, for our time. We literally accept things that can be printed and created out of nothing. But over time, that's not going to be the case. I think over time, as people figure out what Bitcoin is, merchants are going to want Bitcoin. I think right now we are in that time where merchants are willing to accept pieces of paper. And think about it. Me and you are lucky. We understand how Bitcoin works and we're not having to give it away. So why would we? Over time, though, that's not going to be the case anymore. I think over time, merchants are going to see that Bitcoin is a much better form of money and they're not going to have to exchange it for something else in the future, and they can just hold on to Bitcoin rather than, let's say, if they hold dollars, now they have to make the decision of whether they expand, whether they buy treasury bonds, whether they buy S&P 500, whether they buy more buildings, how they are going to basically expand their business. And they have to make that decision right away. There's no choice for them to just hold on to their dollars because they know for a fact that their dollars are melting. They're dying. They're slowly going to be worthless. So I think what's going to happen is, I mean, maybe you're right. Maybe it'll take a while because most people, I think they just like getting screwed over by the dollar because no matter what happens, people will continue to defend it. But eventually, I think the wave of people who want Bitcoin for services and goods is going to be so strong that we're not going to think of dollars as money anymore. I think we're just in a very weird time in history. I think 100, 200, 300 years ago from now, people are going to listen to our conversation here and they're going to be thinking, why were they even debating this?
Yeah.
Why were they even talking about people receiving pieces of paper for goods and services? Why were they giving away something that's finite in exchange for pieces of paper? It makes no sense. But that only comes once you actually understand what Bitcoin is. And like I said, I mean, I don't think I said this here, but the majority of the world doesn't actually understand what Bitcoin is. So how do you expect them to accept Bitcoin for their goods and services, for the services that they provide? So the majority of the world isn't going to do that. I think it's going to take some time. I think you're right. Maybe it'll take 10, 20 years, but at some point we're not going to want dollars anymore. The dollar is going to be worthless. It's like comparing the peso, the Argentinian peso, or the Zimbabwe dollar to US dollars. People in those countries want dollars because the dollar it's maintaining its value. It doesn't matter if it's stable or not. In terms of pesos and in terms of Zimbabwe dollars, the dollar is not stable. So when people say, "Oh, Bitcoin is not stable," it's because they're looking at it from the wrong perspective. They're looking at it from the perspective where the dollar exists and we use the dollar as money. But I don't think that's going to be the case anymore in a very, actually it may not even take as long as we think. Maybe it'll take 10 years, 15 years. Because by then, the people who are growing up, let's say people who are in their 20s, in 30 years, they're going to be living their entire lives with Bitcoin as the money, with Bitcoin as their store of value. So they're going to have accumulated so much Bitcoin, they're going to be willing to exchange it for goods and services. And by that time, their purchasing power is going to be so high that they're going to be willing to give it away in exchange for value. So I think it's going to completely change. I think everything is about to shift. I think this is called the Overton window, where people are just they're mentally accepting the paradigm shift. That's we're right in the beginning of that, in my opinion. I think we're right in the beginning of people accepting that Bitcoin is money, and eventually there's going to be no question about it.
Yeah. I love that you mentioned Argentina. I was just there just over a year ago in December of last year, and like not a month ago, but 13 months ago. And what was even more interesting to see was I was there in 2017 initially, and I noticed that as I walked down this amazing town in the Patagonia area called Bariloche, as I walked down like the street that has all the shops, there was people that instead of working, they were standing on the street yelling, "Cambio, cambio,
Yeah.
sell me your dollars," right? Like I'll give you pesos. And I was thinking, why would somebody spend their whole day instead of working to change currency and to get like they were offering above the official rate was in 2017 was 15.5 pesos per dollar. And they were offering 16.5 because they really wanted the dollars. Now, when I went back a year ago, so it would have been the end of 2023, the ratio was 900 to 1.
Yeah.
So it went from me going there one time to the next time, it went from 15 and a half or 16 and a half to 900. And that's just like mind blowing. And so for me, I look at the exact same thing, but with Bitcoin and say, why would I want to hold dollars when the like I can have two currencies and the moment that I need to spend the dollars, then sure, I will. There you go. Now it's up to
Yeah.
the
This
informal
shows
rate. Yeah,
you can see the
1200.
bank rate, you can see the official rate, and you can see the informal rate. This is the rate that you're talking about, the cambio.
Yep.
It's
So
crazy.
even from 900 to 12,000, even that's 33% in a year
Yeah.
that it's devalued. And we already know that the dollar, if we think inflation is bad here in the US, like these guys have no chance. And
Yeah.
I was talking to my wife, these are Colombian pesos. This is 50,000, which is about 10 or $12, something like that. I was just laughing with my wife one day after we got it out of the ATM. I was like, can you believe that we can just trade these pieces of paper and people will give us like food or people will like clean our apartment or do all these things? Like, it's so silly. It's so funny when you think about it. And one of my favorite, it's not a conspiracy, but it's like I don't really believe it, but at the same time, I think it's kind of funny. Is like if Satoshi Nakamoto was an alien that was like, I can't be bothered to go to Earth and deal with these people when they're going to try to pay me with paper. So I got to give them something that actually makes sense and is actually scarce before I even go and contact them, before I even decide, because otherwise, they're clearly their consciousness level isn't high enough.
Yeah. That's actually really interesting. I feel like that I haven't really thought of that before. I have heard that Satoshi could be an alien. It could be some kind of AI. I mean, I don't know if that's true. I don't know who nobody really knows, but I mean, it makes sense, right? Why would you want pieces of paper if you understand that those pieces of paper can be created out of nothing? Why would you want them to exchange your finite time for them? If you accept dollars, that's perfectly fine. Like, for example, I have my consultations. I charge dollars for them because the people who consult with me don't have Bitcoin. They're trying to learn about Bitcoin. But eventually, I think everything is going to be in dollars. But by that point, my content, maybe this podcast, the one that we're talking about here, is going to be irrelevant because everybody's going to already own Bitcoin. Everybody's going to already know what Bitcoin is. But at that point, the value of Bitcoin is going to be so much higher. So, for example, today, the purchasing power of a Bitcoin is 100,000 US dollars. You can exchange your one Bitcoin for 100,000 US dollars. At that point, you're going to be able to exchange your Bitcoin for a lot more because over time, more and more dollars are constantly chasing Bitcoin. More and more dollars are constantly being added to the economy. Just like your 50,000 Colombian pesos there, the dollar is also going to be hyperinflating against Bitcoin because every single currency at that level is exactly the same thing. If you can create a currency out of thin air, it's the same thing as any other currency. It's just that we trust that the US government isn't going to dilute our currency as much as other governments. So let's say the Colombian government, we don't know how much they're going to dilute their currency. We have no idea. There's no mandate. I have no idea. Maybe there is a mandate, but I would personally expect that the US government is going to print less money than the Colombian government because the Colombian government, I mean, there's less trust in their currency, so the currency is losing value faster, and then it's just a self-fulfilling prophecy. As the currency loses value faster, people start trusting it less, and the government has to print even faster in order to pay for its expenses. And over time, it just compounds, it compounds, and it compounds. And like we saw with the Argentinian peso, it went from at the time. Actually, I went to Argentina. I believe it was October last year. It was at 1300 then, so it dropped, which to me is kind of weird because the peso should be much weaker than the dollar. It shouldn't be increasing in purchasing power. The peso at that time you could buy 100 or sorry, 1 US dollar for 130 pesos. Today you can buy 1 US dollar for 100 and sorry, not 130, 1300 pesos. Today you can buy 1 US dollar for 1,200 pesos. So the purchasing power of the peso has gone up in terms of the US dollar. So where is this going? I mean, over time, who knows? Maybe the US dollar is not going to be as powerful as we think it will. And over time, because Bitcoin is this money that can't be created out of thin air, maybe it'll completely just replace the current financial system. And I wouldn't be surprised if that happens.
I agree. Yeah, I think it will happen. It's just a question of when. I've also
Yeah.
come to 2017 was my first real bull market. I got in at the tail end, like around $6,000, but I was traveling in Asia and basically like put my travel on hold or like stop being a tourist to just spend every single day reading about Bitcoin because I was
Mhm.
like, I had initially bought some in like the end of 2014, but it was like $50 worth. And I have a journal entry that was like December 20th, 2014. I think Bitcoin's an incredible investment. It's $333. And then 7 days later, Bitcoin has crashed down to $300. I no longer think it's a good investment. I'm going to get rid of it. And it was
Oh,
just, yeah, it was just so, it's so funny to look back at that entry and be like, yeah, that was I mean, it's part of the hero's journey, I think, because
yeah.
then in 2017, got into Bitcoin. That was the obvious thing. And then I fell for some of the marketing. This was right around the Bcash fork. So I fell for some of the marketing of Bitcoin's old and it's broken and it doesn't do a lot. So then I became like, I'm buying Ethereum every day. So I had a dollar cost average for Ethereum. And I thought Ethereum's better than Bitcoin. It's a better technology. And now I own zero Ethereum and I think Ethereum's a scam and it's created to take your attention away from Bitcoin to either slow you down in accumulating Bitcoin, or the owners just want to accumulate more Bitcoin themselves.
Yeah. It's just a
So,
distraction.
yeah, exactly. And people will say at that time, my thesis was this is like the internet boom of the early 2000s or late 90s, early 2000s. And I don't know who the winner is, so I'm going to spread out. I had 73 different cryptocurrencies at one
Wow.
point at the height of my stupidity, and all of them lost money. Like most of them went to zero, and all of them are trending to zero in Bitcoin terms. So
Yeah.
I think did you have the hero's journey? You said 2022 is when you first started studying Bitcoin. So you're moving really fast for somebody who only came in 2 years or 3 years ago. Did you go through the hero's journey of getting distracted by altcoins and by other cryptos and buying those and stuff like that?
So I started learning about Bitcoin in either 2020 or 2021. It might have been the end of 2020. But I did go through that. I didn't quite understand what Bitcoin was until mid 2022, maybe near the end of 2022. That's when I sold all my stocks. So I actually consider stocks to be shit coins now too. I consider real estate to be a shit coin. Everything is a shit coin in comparison to Bitcoin. But I did own a ton of random altcoins. I owned, do you remember when Terra or Luna, whatever it was,
Yep.
when they were collapsing, when it went from like $76 all the way down to like $2? I was thinking that I was smart. I was thinking, oh, it's gonna come back. It's going to recover. And clearly it didn't. It just kept dropping. So it dropped 90%, then it dropped another 90%, then it dropped another 90%, then it dropped another 90%. And it'll keep going until every single person who wants Luna is gone, or whatever that coin was called, is gone. And that's the same thing that's going to happen to every other cryptocurrency. People say that, oh, ETH is oil, Bitcoin is gold. No, ETH is nothing. Bitcoin is money. Bitcoin is not gold. Bitcoin is money. We were distracted by gold, thinking that gold was money for a very long time, but gold doesn't work as money. It's not the best form of money that we have. It's the best form of money that we had before the internet. It's the best form of money that we had before the dollar existed, but clearly the dollar took a lot of its share because the dollar was so much easier to transact with. The way that I see it, Bitcoin is a combination between fiat and gold. It takes all of the best properties of both and it combines them. It gives you something that's easily transportable, it gives you something that's fungible, it gives you something that can be divided as much as you want to. It's easily moved around the world. It's durable. You can't destroy it. So what Bitcoin does is it gives you this form of money that replaces every other form of money. And like you said, like the way that I see it, Bitcoin is going to replace everything. It's we're not going to assign a monetary value to anything. There's going to be no monetary premium on anything. Let's say, for example, you have beachfront property. Maybe it'll be worth more than a property in the suburbs, but that's not monetary premium. That's a utility value. You have utility for that. So if you have beachfront property, You have the utility of being able to see the beach every single day. That's utility. That's not monetary premium. That's not a way for people to just store their value for the future because it wouldn't make any sense. That beachfront property is going to massively underperform against Bitcoin, regardless of where on earth it is. So over time, I think more and more people are going to get down this rabbit hole. More and more people are going to have this hero's journey. They're going to see that everything else is a failure. Everything else is going to zero. Everything else is worthless compared to Bitcoin. When you really understand what Bitcoin is, Bitcoin gives you the optionality to buy whatever you want to. You can buy anything in the world that you want. You can buy utility with Bitcoin. And that's the thing that I like about it. The thing that I think that really makes it so much better than any other currency. There's a saleability, for a fact that people around the world will accept your Bitcoin, but who knows if they'll accept your ETH? Who knows if they'll accept your Cardano or your AVAX or whatever other cryptocurrencies there are. I actually did have a portfolio of all these random cryptocurrencies. I was doing a dollar cost average as well. So what I was doing is I was putting something like $1, $2 into every random cryptocurrency that I'd heard of. I remember there was one called Curve. There was one called what other currencies are there? Polkadot. There's one with a unicorn. I don't know what the cryptocurrencies are, but
Uniswap.
they're yeah, Uniswap. That's probably what it was. But there was all these other cryptocurrencies that I was distracted by, and when I finally realized that Bitcoin is the future, I sold all my Ethereum. I sold all my. I had a little bit of XRP. I'd even fallen for that. So I'd sold all of those things. I gave all of them away in exchange for Bitcoin. And that, I think every single person in the world who's currently buying all these random cryptocurrencies and falling for the trap, thinking that, oh, they're better because they're faster, they're better because they're cheaper. I think they're finally going to realize at some point that Bitcoin is better. Who knows when, though? Like right now, one ETH is worth something like 0.03 Bitcoin. At some point, it'll drop to 0.02, 0.01. It'll keep falling. And who knows when people will realize it, but eventually they will. Maybe they won't be able to get any Bitcoin in exchange for their ETH because ETH is so worthless.
Yeah, I don't even know what you use it for. Like I interact somewhat frequently, almost every month with the Bitcoin blockchain. Like I actually use the blockchain because I've bought some and then I'm transferring it to cold storage, or I'm paying people. Like if anybody asks me, will you pay me in Bitcoin? I say absolutely. Even though I'm spending some of this thing that I feel like the best strategy would be, no, let me put it on a 0% interest credit card. So that way then when I'm paying it back 12 months later, the dollars are worth even less. But I want to accelerate adoption and I want to help people get into this space. Like it to me, it's like if I truly value their service, why wouldn't I give them real money instead of fake play money?
Yeah. That's
So
how I see it too. If you want to give, if you're getting value and you're giving value, you should get something that is worth something to you and you should give away something that's worth something to you. Because if you're giving away pieces of paper, like to me, for example, I have $100 bill here, just sitting here. I don't see any, I know it's worth something. I know other people see value in it, but to me, it's a joke. It's just something that people want because they trust that it'll have value tomorrow. But that trust can fade immediately. That trust can fade overnight. And if you're going to pay somebody with value, either you give them dollars and maybe they'll exchange it for something else, maybe they'll exchange it for Bitcoin, or you pay them Bitcoin directly. I think that's what's going to create the circular economy where people are paying each other in Bitcoin. They're creating more value because they want more Bitcoin, and they're giving away Bitcoin because they want to value the merchants that they're working with.
yeah, I've seen Zaprite is an invoicing tool where you can give somebody the option, the checkout page where they can pay in a card, they can pay in Bitcoin, and then you can also put like if you make me deal with dollars, it's 20% more. Or
Oh,
you can do it the other way and say, if you pay in Bitcoin, save 3% or 5%, which is then going to save you the credit card processing fees, which if anybody who's watching this is not running a business, every time you receive a credit card transaction, the bank takes 3%. And it's like everybody asks, like, how do I get rid of this? Like, it's so ridiculous that just to accept a payment, I'm paying one or I'm saying the price is 5,000, but really I'm getting significantly less than that. Like I'm on
yeah,
5,000, I'm losing $150 just for that transaction.
yeah.
So I am thinking that there will be probably this bull market, probably the year 2025 will be the year where we start seeing merchants offering discounts to pay in Bitcoin.
Yeah. I think
And
that's
so,
possible. I think that's happening already. I think more and more merchants want Bitcoin. More and more people are figuring out what Bitcoin is. So of course they're going to want Bitcoin, right? It's the best form of money in the world, something that nothing can compete with. Even governments are worried. You can tell that governments are worried because they're trying to ban it. They're trying to stop it. They're trying to spread FUD about it. Like, for example, I mean, it's not a government institution, but the European Central Bank, they've constantly been saying that Bitcoin is going to zero. They've said that, I don't know if you saw the article, but they said that um, Bitcoin is just a way for people to get wealthy. It's going to probably go to $10 million. But have you seen that article? I'm not sure if you've seen
no.
it, but basically they said that Bitcoin's price is based on whatever the market thinks it is. It could go between $0 and $10 million. So they're kind of saying that, oh, this thing is probably going to go higher if more and more people adopt it, if more and more people figure out what it is. They're telling you that if you don't buy Bitcoin, you're going to be poor.
Yeah, they said the quiet part out loud. It sounds
Yeah,
like oh, it's probably going to go to 10 million. I mean, to me, that's like okay, well, if they agree that it's going to 10 million, because I know it'll be $10 million in our lifetime.
yeah,
So why? I don't know. It's shocking to me that people can't. I think it's an ego thing. It really is. Like that, I
yeah.
have some friends who are extremely successful in real estate, like making $1 million plus a year, and because the current system works for them. They're all about the wire transfer. And I'm like, dude, how long does it take for a wire transfer to go
Hmm.
through? And they're complaining about when I was looking in real estate in 2018, they were talking about sending a wire transfer and they had to hurry and oh, it hadn't landed yet. And I'm just like, you could send this in 10 minutes on the
Yeah.
Bitcoin blockchain. And obviously, the traditional world, it seems like there's a really good article called Check Your Financial Privilege that
Oh, I've
talks
seen that.
about why people who are wealthy or the current system it works well for them and they haven't traveled outside the US, they haven't or Canada or wherever and they haven't seen what like there's a whole other world out there that everybody uses a different currency and every time that you swap you pay a 7% conversion fee or whatever the case is and why wouldn't we all just get on the same standard?
Yeah. And it makes life so much easier too. Think about it this way. When I went to Argentina, I had to go to, I actually went to an exchange place in my area in Canada, and they didn't have pesos because the Argentinian peso is losing value so quickly. And there's so little peso. I guess they don't want to, there's not many people that are coming from Argentina to Toronto and exchanging their pesos for dollars. But it was such a hassle trying to figure out how I'm going to get the currency to use in this other country. I had to exchange my Canadian dollars for US dollars. I had to pay a 3 or 2%, whatever it was, conversion fee. The bank took a cut and they literally did nothing. They just took money from one pocket and they switched it with the money in another pocket. That's literally it. They took a cut out of that. I mean, that's kind of what the system is built on. The system is built on allowing these financial institutions to control our finances, to take a cut out of every single thing that we earn, and I mean, it applies to everything. If you have a business, they're taking a cut. If you earn a paycheck, they're going to take a cut because they charge you fees. They're going to take a cut no matter what. And that's pretty much what this entire thing is built on. With Bitcoin, you don't have to deal with that anymore. And like you said, with the service that you were mentioning before, was it Zaprate?
Is that right? Yeah.
Um, you get to account for those fees that the financial institutions are charging, and you can transfer them onto your customers. And that's a great way to do it because it gives your customers an incentive to pay you in Bitcoin so that you can receive actual money for the goods and services you're providing.
I have an incredible visual to pull up that is for people who just like don't see how big of a deal hyperinflation is. This is when I was in Argentina, and it is showing this. These are two are equal amounts,
Wow.
$220, and that's the Argentine peso version. So we went to an exchange, and it's literally you got the rubber bands. Each of these, there's 50 notes in each one of these. So I've got 200 notes. Each of those were worth at the time 50 cents, each of
Wow.
those bills. So it's just like the complication of like, we get all the cash and we're like, where do we hide it or what do we do with it? And so it's just like wild to me to think about how you even operate when there's this much currency going on. And like, that's what real hyperinflation looks like. We have obviously the slower hyperinflation or we have slower inflation, but I'm seeing people who are worried about inflation and they still don't understand the whole
Yeah.
Bitcoin. So it's I guess the saying everybody gets Bitcoin at the price they deserve is so true. I always tell people buy $10 worth and send it to a wallet of your own and then call me and I'll help you. And like do that one step first so that way I know that you've put in a little bit of proof of work. And then I can show you how powerful it is on how we can write down the backup phrase, wipe the wallet, you can cross a border, or you can give me the phrase and I can be in here in Colombia and I can access that money.
Yeah.
And it's just like mind blowing to people. Like there's in Venezuela, when people were like as like refugees or whatever you want to call it, as they're crossing the border into Colombia, they would buy Bitcoin, write down the 12 words, go across the border, open a wallet, and they would have access to their money. And it's just
Yeah.
like it really is a freedom technology. Like freedom is my highest value by far. And it's it allows you so much. Like I think I'm to the point where I probably will never have to work again if I don't want to because I chose to save in Bitcoin. And that
Yeah.
was 5 years ago, I had less than $10,000 to my name, right? Aside from like something that was in a retirement account. And so, uh, Michael Saylor has a really good analogy. He always talks about Bitcoin being like the land in New York, like the granite itself, like a city block, and how the families who own that, they own it forever and they never sell it. I think, I don't know if this is a better analogy, but I was walking the other day. I'm here in the countryside. There's a landowner here in Colombia that owns probably like 100 acres of land. And they just recently sold a small portion of it off to have it developed into more homes. And I was thinking to myself initially, like feeling a little bit of jealousy and like, man, I wish I would have gotten to this town sooner to buy that land because they have so much land, they can live on it. They have so much privacy because they own everything that could be a neighbor. And then when they decide they need money, they can just sell off this tiniest little portion of it and then they get a ton of money for that and then they only have to do that once every like 10 years or something like
Yeah.
that. But then I realized how lucky are we to be alive during the time that Bitcoin is monetizing, because I'll use the same analogy. Say you get to one Bitcoin, which now is, like you said, about $100,000. So it may take you a while if you're buying $10 or $50 per day or whatever to get to that point of having one full Bitcoin. But then you can reasonably just live off of one Bitcoin for your whole life. I think that haven't you done some math on like when you can retire off of one Bitcoin or how you can retire off of only one Bitcoin or something like that?
Yeah, I did. So it was that same spreadsheet that I mentioned before, the compound interest calculator. I actually wanted to go back to something that you mentioned, with the cash.
Yeah.
I don't know if you remember this, but every single store in Argentina had a money counter. And
Hmm.
to that blew my mind because how often do you see money counters in the US? How often do you see money counters in Canada? Barely ever. They're only in banks, right? So every single institution has to have a money counter because of just how much money there is in the system. And yeah, so I did run the numbers for how long it would take for you to retire with one Bitcoin. Of course, everything is just subjective. I mean, every depends on what you think that the return should be. Who really knows? Nobody has a crystal ball. But I think over time, within the next 20 years, one Bitcoin is going to be generational wealth. I think anybody in the world will be able to own Bitcoin, own one Bitcoin. I mean, not everybody in the world will be able to own it because it'll be so expensive, but anybody who does own it will be able to sustain their lifestyles for a very, very, very long time with just one Bitcoin. It'll be generations that'll be sustaining their lifestyles with that one Bitcoin because the value is going to go up so quick. There's only 21 million for the entire world. There's 8 billion people in the world. If you split the amount of Bitcoin with all those people and you subtract all the lost coins, you have something like 200,000 satoshis per person, and one Bitcoin is 100 million satoshis. So if you own 100 million satoshis. Sorry, did I say 1 million or 100 million? It's one Bitcoin is 100 million satoshis. If you own 200,000 satoshis, you've basically gotten your share of the global wealth. But if you have 100 million satoshis, that's going to cover you for 5,000 years or something like that. It's crazy. There's no way to change it. There's no way to stop that. There's no way to increase the supply of Bitcoin to dilute the people who own it. So over time, if you just sell small bits of your Bitcoin, if that's what you want to do, if you want to borrow against your Bitcoin while fiat currencies survive, of course, you can do that as well. But I mean, over time, the value of this thing is just going to keep rising and rising until everybody in the world has Bitcoin. until Bitcoin is not the best returning asset in the world, eventually there will be companies, for example, people are going to be investing in companies like MicroStrategy, other companies who are generating Bitcoin. So let's say maybe Apple starts accepting Bitcoin for their goods and services. How much do you think Apple's value is going to increase in that time? It's probably going to massively outperform every other company in the world if you really look at it from that perspective. But again, until the world goes to a Bitcoin standard, until everything is repriced, the value of everything will continue to drop in terms of Bitcoin. So I think Bitcoin is the best savings tool for a very, very long time. I think Bitcoin will be the best savings tool for the rest of our lives, for the rest of eternity, really, until we start seeing that, I mean, there's no other way to save. Until that happens, Bitcoin's going to outperform everything.
Yeah. I think because you can't touch it and it takes work, like you need to put at least 10 hours in to understand. Like that's I wrote and I just wrote it in like a Google Doc and like maybe I published it on Medium back in 2020, but it was more just for myself. I was writing like the answer to the question, is now a good time to buy Bitcoin or should you buy Bitcoin? And what I wrote was not yet. Instead of investing your money into Bitcoin, you should invest your time to understand what it is, like spend the 10 hours because then you're not spending you because most people value money more than their time. I'm the
Yeah.
complete opposite. I value time way more than money. And it's obvious. Like you trade, you ask somebody to clean your place or cut your grass or do whatever so that way you don't have to do it and you trade money to save that time. So to me, that's obvious. But what do you say? Like, I try to spend a lot of time figuring out how could I be wrong? And what like I've spent at least probably 50 hours contemplating how could Bitcoin fail or how could we be wrong or how could this be a trap? There's a conspiracy that it was created by an intelligence agency or something like that. And it's like, okay, even if that's true, how could it break or how could it be wrong? The code is open source, everybody can run it. It's opt in, so we choose to run it. What's like the either the best critique that you've seen, or like if you were to like completely switch stance and say, how could I be wrong? Like, what's the most likely case in how Bitcoin doesn't work?
So I want to actually go into what would make me sell my Bitcoin. Let's say,
Yeah.
for example, overnight the supply goes from 21 million to 22 million, 25 million, 30 million. That to me means that if it's increased now, it's going to continue to increase because the people who are running the Bitcoin protocol don't agree with me that 21 million should always be the max cap, the max supply cap. Maybe that's something that could change if people just collectively start believing something different. But I don't know, why would they? Why would they want to dilute themselves? That doesn't make any sense. The next thing that could happen is, of course, if governments are they're more conscious of their spending and they stop spending like idiots. And I don't think that's going to happen because if you have the ability to spend, then why wouldn't you? They can literally borrow money into existence. So why wouldn't they? The debt for the US is going to continue to increase. It's at $36.3 trillion dollars now. It'll go to 37 trillion, 38, 40, 50, 60, 100 until the world collectively realizes that we don't want US dollars anymore and they stop lending the US government money. The US government is going to continue to just borrow and borrow. And then we're going to see the Fed buying as much debt as they can to sustain the US government's addiction to spending. So let's say the US government stops spending money. That could probably be a problem. But then again, I don't think that's going to change anything because Bitcoin is decentralized. The US government's dollar, the US government's money is not decentralized. So uh, it's not really a replacement for Bitcoin. So I don't think Bitcoin would fail in that case. Maybe it'll slow down the growth. But I also think that people are going to move their value from other assets into Bitcoin. So maybe that's not even going to happen. The next thing, let's say the world goes to a gold standard. Maybe that'll slow down Bitcoin's adoption, but I don't think it'll stop Bitcoin from working because if you want to use, let's say a Bitcoin, or let's say you want to use a gold-backed currency, that gold has to be held by someone. You can't transfer gold over the internet. Let's say I wanted to transact with you. You're in Colombia, I'm in Toronto. If I had gold and I wanted to send it to you, how do I get it to you? I have to either mail it to you, I have to ship it to you, I have to do something where it has to get to you. But I have to trust all these other institutions, all these other entities in the middle in order to send that gold to you. So again, defeats the purpose. That's not really I mean that Bitcoin can do much better than that. Bitcoin because I can send you Bitcoin over the internet and nobody can stop me from doing that. I don't have to rely on some entity to transact Bitcoin for me. Maybe if I use Lightning, if I use a Lightning wallet, like let's say Wallet of Satoshi, for example, then I have to rely on Wallet of Satoshi. But again, I don't have to put my entire net worth in Wallet of Satoshi. So I don't think I think that's another thing that really won't work. Maybe there's something else. Maybe quantum computing. I don't know if quantum computing is a threat. I don't think it is, to be honest. I don't have a very in-depth knowledge of quantum computing, of course. I'm not a technical guy, but the way that I see it, Bitcoin is programmable money. So if quantum computing does happen, people are going to have to change their wallets. They're going to have to do a transaction to move their Bitcoin to a quantum resistant address or a quantum resistant wallet. I don't know how that's going to happen. I know something is in the works for that. But if it does happen, of course, you're going to have to move your Bitcoin. And I think what's going to happen in that case is a lot of people are going to be very angry because maybe they don't know how to move their Bitcoin. Maybe they didn't pay attention and whoever starts up the first quantum computer that actually works with something like I think it's supposed to be 1 million qubits or something like that. If that does get created and they wipe every single address that hasn't secured themselves against quantum computing, maybe they get screwed over in that case and they get really, really angry and they start hating the Bitcoin network. I don't think it's going to fail again. It's just going to lose adoption. But again, the Bitcoin that they lost is going to be moved to someone else. That's all that's going to happen. I mean, at the end of the day, there's always accountability. You have to learn how to be accountable to yourself. You have to learn how to be taking care of your money. If you can't take care of your money, then you're going to lose it. It's like if you have cash in your pocket and somebody figures out a way to get into your pocket and take it out, you're the one to blame. You should be taking care of your money. You should if let's say for example, if I just have this $100 bill sitting in my pocket and sticking out, somebody just reaches out and they take it out from my pocket, then of course that's not the $100 bill's fault. That's my fault for not taking care of my money. So what you have to do with Bitcoin is you have to continuously be learning, you have to continuously be paying attention. And while quantum computing could be a threat to maybe break Bitcoin, I don't think it totally will. I had a conversation with somebody named Jonathan Carvalho. I'm not sure if you know him, but he basically said to me that the other issue with Bitcoin that we could have is maybe Bitcoin Core. So Bitcoin Core is the protocol basically. The if you download Bitcoin Core, you can run a node. There are a small group of people that actually control the updates on Bitcoin Core. Who knows? Maybe some entity out there, maybe BlackRock, maybe MicroStrategy, maybe the US government has a mole, a person inside Bitcoin Core that can change Bitcoin and completely change what it stands for. And over time, it happens. It's not going to happen overnight. It's going to happen 1% a year. Maybe 20 years from now, Bitcoin is completely different. And we didn't even notice the transition. But I don't think that's going to really be that big of an issue because every time there's a change to Bitcoin, every time there's an update, people are constantly just talking about it on Reddit. So, I mean, the way that I see it, I don't really see Bitcoin falling apart. I don't see people losing trust in the Bitcoin network because it's not based on trust. It's real. The Bitcoin network, you can actually see every single transaction. You can go on mempool.space. You can see every single transaction that's ever happened. You can confirm that you received a transaction. So a lot of people say that Bitcoin is a religion and the trust will just go away. It'll just fade. That's not true because not trying to be offensive to people who are religious, but religion is stories. Nobody can go back in time and confirm that those things happened. Again, I'm not saying that maybe my understanding of this is wrong, but with Bitcoin, you can see every single transaction that's ever happened. You can confirm that Bitcoin was created on January 3rd, 2009. It was the first block was mined on January 3rd, 2009. And after that, every single block that's been created, I think there was a block 7 days later or something like that. But you can confirm every single block. You can confirm all of the history. Nobody can lie to you. You can see where every single Bitcoin came from. So you know for a fact that this thing is real. You can't change it. You can't manipulate it. You can't stop other people from using it. So I don't really see a way for Bitcoin to fail at this point. I don't really see a way for Bitcoin's network to break, to fall apart, for people to stop using it.
I agree. The core is the only possible one, and I'll get into that in a sec. But first, quantum computing, to me, it's a non-issue. Why? Because our nukes are secured with SHA-256 as well. So the same encryption algorithm that's securing our nukes, the entire financial system, the fact that my ATM PIN code is 4 digits long, right? And that passwords, like all your passwords will be broken at the same time. So everything will be broken if quantum computing can do that. And we could just move to a new algorithm. And then also, if there were a catastrophic bug of some kind, I think the consensus of Bitcoiners would decide, hey, when did this bug take place? Okay, let's do a snapshot of a couple blocks before, and that is the new Bitcoin, and we create a fork and we start it over. Now,
Yeah.
then of course you have the issue of now it's like Ethereum, where it's no longer immutable, where it's like, okay, well, we made a change, so what happens? What's to say that we won't make another change in the future? So that could lose some trust. But the only risk that I see is with a new update into the system that wasn't fully thought out. Because all I learned from Jason Lowery, the MIT Space Force guy, that all hacking is using logic in the system itself in a way that the programmer didn't initially design it. So like I always thought before hacking was like breaking something or doing something. Well, no, it's just following the exact rules of, whether you call it computer science or physics or whatever, it's just following those rules, but in a way that wasn't initially intended by the programmer. And so perhaps, like for example, I don't think Taproot is a bug, and I don't think SegWit was a bug, but I am in favor of let's just not change the protocol anymore because it works right now. Build everything else on top, just like how TCP/IP is the base of the internet and everything else is built on top. I think that all the development should be layer twos and layer threes. And I think that we're going to see some, I don't even think we know what this technology is. Like we know that it's a money that can allow us to not rely on third parties and we aren't being debased by a government. There's no inflation. But I think when we're talking about like MicroStrategy talking about putting some kind of protocol called Orange on top that you can now use identity. So you can use this to, um, so we can use this to make it so in order for somebody to send me a message, they have to prove that they're not a bot and they have to prove that they put some money behind this message. And that way, if it was complete spam or a complete waste of my time or whatever, I could then take that from them. And so there's an actual cost. It's kind of like proof of work, which is the consensus algorithm, which is, I think, the most important part of Bitcoin. Like you see it in the world. Greatest analogy that I've seen is the Great Pyramids. That was proof of work. They had to put it together, right? Digging gold out of the ground, you have to actually do the work, and nothing comes for free in physics. There's always a cost. So there's like if we were to switch to something away from proof of work, or if there wasn't the difficulty adjustment or something like that, then yeah, I could see it breaking or not being successful. But just the fact that there's so much energy behind it, I don't see a way that it breaks. Personally, I haven't found a good. Every argument that I've heard has been just like stupid. It's like,
Yeah.
yeah, but you're measuring Bitcoin in dollars, so that's what people care about is the dollars. I'm like, for now, because
Yeah.
that's the reference point. So it will get interesting. How do we price things when we move to a Bitcoin standard? Because if you price it at 0.01 Bitcoin, like a house, 0.01 Bitcoin, then is it 0.01 Bitcoin in 10 years? Or is it worth less Bitcoin in 10 years? Like I feel like we probably still need to use dollars as like the unit of account. Maybe not, but then because that's how I do it right now, right? You have a consulting fee and somebody wants to pay you in Bitcoin, you send them an invoice for whatever it is, $200 in Bitcoin, and then they pay that. But it was like referenced off of the current dollar system.
Yeah, I think at some point we're going to have to transition to using Satoshis to value things. I don't know when that'll happen. I think it could take a lot of time, but the thing is that the way that we see it right now, Bitcoin isn't at full adoption yet. So what I mean by that is that right now Bitcoin is very volatile because people just look at it in terms of dollars. But the argument that you were mentioning where people say, "Oh, everybody wants dollars, they don't actually want Bitcoin." That's like saying, "Oh, um, everybody actually wants dollars. They don't want food or they don't want houses. They don't want cars. They actually want the dollars." No, but that's not the case. The dollar is just a way for us to assign value. It's just the most widely accepted way for us to assign value to things. That's it. And over time, that can change. And what you were saying about Michael Saylor with the you have to put up some amount of Satoshis, I think that could completely change social media. Like if you look at I'm assuming you have a YouTube channel for this podcast, but on my YouTube channel, I'm spending hours of my day blocking people who are leaving random comments about, oh, I made this much money. You can follow this advisor. This advisor will give you the help to earn this money. It's all scams, right? But if they had to pay a certain amount of Satoshis every time they did that, and they lost those Satoshis, there would be no incentive to try to scam people because it would be too expensive to do so. If there's all these people who are posting about random cryptocurrencies, if they had to pay, let's say, 1,000 Satoshis for every single comment that they make or every single account that they make, they'll run out of Bitcoin. And then as their accounts get blocked, as their accounts get deleted, they lose that Bitcoin. They lose those Satoshis. And I think that's what's going to really change things, exactly like what you said. But over time, people are going to be more accustomed to using Satoshis to value things, to using dollars, to using Satoshis over dollars. Because let's think of it this way. If a kid is born today, let's say 10 years from now, they're probably going to be looking at Bitcoin as their savings tool. They're probably going to be using Bitcoin as their savings tool. If I have a kid, for example, I don't have kids yet, but if I had a kid, I would set them up with a Bitcoin wallet. I'm not going to set them up with an RRSP or some kind of retirement savings account. I'm going to set them up with a Bitcoin wallet because then they can use it for whatever they want to and they can use it whenever they want to instead of putting your money and locking it into in the US a 529, the education plan, in Canada the RESP, the registered education savings plan. I'm just going to buy Bitcoin. I don't care about the grants. The grants aren't going to do anything for my kid when the world doesn't want dollars anymore. In in general, everything loses value against Bitcoin. And I think more and more people are realizing this. More and more people are going to want Bitcoin. So, I mean, it's going to be forced on people using Bitcoin as a medium of exchange unit of account. It's going to be forced on people. They're not going to have a choice.
Yeah. I mean, you always have to opt in, but it'll be the opportunity cost is what forces them, right?
I mean, there's an extent to which you can opt in. Like for us, we can opt in because we're so early. But at some point, every merchant's going to only want Bitcoin. So you don't have to opt in. You're going to be forced
Uh,
to use Bitcoin. If merchants know that dollars are worthless and they only want Bitcoin, or let's say a merchant's giving you a 10% discount for using Bitcoin, you're kind of forced into it because you're forced to pay 10% more if you pay in dollars. So why would you give away your value if you have the choice? It's not even at that point. It's not even a choice because that I think that spread is going to get bigger and bigger because it's not going to be worth it for merchants to accept dollars. It's going to get more and more expensive for them to exchange their dollars for Bitcoin because there's not going to be that much Bitcoin on the market.
yeah. Yeah, that's so important. The thing that really, well, two things really helped me understand Bitcoin. One was I was like, yeah, but you have to be able to spend it. You have to be able to use it. In 2017, I bought a flight with Bitcoin. Well, when Bitcoin was $6,000, so now that flight is, worth thousands of dollars that I, paid for the flight is probably worth like $20,000 now. So in hindsight, it would have been better to pay with my credit card. But the once you see that you can actually buy something that you want with Bitcoin, I think there's a huge mindset shift because before then it's like, well, does it really work or is this just a like when people understand that it's a savings technology, which is that's I think the best way to describe it, then it makes it a little bit easier. But what was your aha moment or what was your in your learning process? Because you said you started researching in 2020, but you didn't really get into it until 2022. So what was that journey like for you?
I mean, the way that I see it, you can buy whatever you want with Bitcoin because you can exchange your Bitcoin for fiat.
Yep.
If you can exchange your Bitcoin for dollars, every single person in the world wants dollars right now. Technically, you can buy whatever you want. So to me, I mean, that it makes sense. But over time, I think the most important thing is that you have to understand that there's always going to be an opportunity cost. The legacy financial system just gave us a way to transact without opportunity costs. Today, for example, if you have a rental property, you don't have to sell it. You can delay gratification by owning it, and you can get the benefits of owning it over the long term. But at the same time, you can get instant gratification by borrowing money that's created out of thin air. It's just the current system is just flawed.
Yeah.
Bitcoin is the right way to do things because you shouldn't be able to save and spend at the same time. It doesn't make any sense. It just leads to this massive wealth gap. That's what led to the wealth gap. Like if you think about it, if somebody has a $5 million house and they want to get a Ferrari as well, they'll just get a loan against their house. So they get to enjoy having that massive house, and then at the same time, they get to pay Ferrari in fake money. So who loses in this situation? Ferrari. Ferrari loses because they're getting paid in a fake form of money. They're giving away a car that they put the time, effort, and resources into making, but they're getting back something that can be created out of nothing. So it's a flawed system. Right? Like the way that you see it, the way that you see it with your flight, that's how it's supposed to be. You chose to go on that flight. You could, I mean, obviously, people do this. They spend and replace. I don't know if you did that, but I mean, if you didn't, that's perfectly fine. Maybe you didn't have if I'm sure if you had cash, if you could just spend on a credit card, you would have just spent on that credit card, right?
Yep.
At the end of the day, we need to spend in order to sustain our lifestyles. If we don't spend to sustain our lifestyle, what's the point of life? You have to give away your Bitcoin because Bitcoin is the best form of money. You have to give away your Bitcoin. It gives you optionality. If you want to exercise that option, you have to give away the option. You have to give away that Bitcoin in order to get what you want to. You use Bitcoin to buy utility. Bitcoin in and of itself has no utility. The only utility of, I mean, well, I mean, like physical utility. There is utility where you can move around with it. You can avoid sanctions. You can avoid having your money stolen from you. Obviously, that's utility. But what I mean by utility is physical utility. So let's say I have this marker right here. The utility of this marker is that I can write with it. I can't write with Bitcoin.
Yeah.
Whoever created this marker, whoever gave me the ability to buy this marker and use it to write with it, sacrifice their time, energy, and resources to do the research to make this marker. And I have to pay them for it. I didn't put in the time, energy, and resources. I'm paying them for their previous time that they put into this research and development. So to me, I mean, it makes sense. If you don't want to if you want to save money, don't spend your Bitcoin. If you want to spend your Bitcoin, you have to give it away. If you want to consume, you have to give away your Bitcoin. That's the only way for you to really spend. If people can't wrap their heads around that, I mean, I don't know. I don't know how they're going to really get through life because they clearly don't understand opportunity costs. Opportunity costs is what the world is built on. You have to decide whether you do one thing or the other. You have to decide whether you keep your Bitcoin or you spend it on, let's say, food. If you don't want to spend it on food and you don't have any other cash, you starve to death. It's your choice. Do you want to starve to death or do you want to hold on to your Bitcoin, right? It's your choice. At the end of the day, we have to spend our money on sustaining our lifestyles. I have to spend money on heat. My house is heated because it's really cold here. I could choose to not turn on my heat to save my Bitcoin, but that's the point of having money. You're supposed to exchange it for the things that you need. And when people understand this, is when I think they make that paradigm shift. Bitcoin is just a savings tool. It's just a way for you to save for the future. When you have extra fiat, you exchange it into Bitcoin. When you need more fiat, you give away your Bitcoin. You get that fiat.
Yeah. How has, since you've adopted Bitcoin, I assume that you're run your life on a Bitcoin standard. And so now that you've done that, how has that changed you as a person as far as like your spending habits? And when you're looking at like, ooh, should I really buy that thing? Have you noticed a difference in your personal behavior?
Yeah, definitely. The way that I see it, if I really want something or need something, then I'm going to spend my money on it. If I can think about whether or not let's say for example, I have my car. My car, it's been 10 years since I've had my car. My car is it needs some repairs, of course. I've been going to the mechanic whenever I can. I could easily say, "Oh, I don't want to repair this thing. I want a new car." I choose to buy a new car. I could give away some of my Bitcoin and I can buy a new car, but I choose not to because I want to keep the Bitcoin. It's the opportunity cost again. If I were to give away my Bitcoin, buy that new car, of course, I'm going to have a better car. I'm going to have maybe a status change. People are going to think of me as a cool guy who has a nice car. But I mean, I don't care about that. What I care about is wealth. I care about having optionality. I care about saving for the future so that I'm not broke when I'm 60, 70 years old. I think that's the key. I kind of understood that principle before, but it was much harder. So for example, with stocks, you can get 10% returns with stocks. The opportunity cost with stocks is much lower. So if you want to spend your money, you can. But with Bitcoin, if you give away your Bitcoin, you're losing 50% returns. You're not losing 10%, you're losing 50% returns. So in a year from now, you can get 50% more things, or you can keep half of your Bitcoin. So, I mean, to me, I mean, I think it made the difference between, I like the terms high time preference, low time preference from Saifedean Ammous. I think those are great. They make a lot of sense, right? You could either spend your money now, you can go and do things that will make you happy today and you can pay for them later, or you can do things that are hard today and you can make your life much, much better in the future. And I think Bitcoin really cemented that for me. The ideas of delayed gratification, instant gratification, the idea of opportunity cost, the idea of sunk cost. If I've spent my money on something and the experience wasn't what I wanted, I can either waste the rest of my life thinking about that experience and constantly thinking, "Oh, I don't want to do this again. I wasted my money on this," or I can move on and I can just use it as a lesson. I can change my future. I think Bitcoin really helped me with that because it showed me that life is precious. It's finite. It's not something you don't want to waste your time thinking about the things that you did wrong in your life. You want to spend your time enjoying your life, and Bitcoin gives you that option. With fiat, you don't have that option because eventually your money is going to be stolen from you regardless of what you do. Even if you save, even if you do everything right, your money is going to be stolen from you. With Bitcoin, that's not the case.
Yeah. There's, as far as volatility, I think this is something that really trips people up. How I always explain it is first off, you need to understand Bitcoin is a network. And so this network is constantly increasing in value as more people adopt it, as new upgrades happen and things like that. And the price is just trying to figure out, it's trying to find that value. And it's just
Yep.
bouncing around and it's based on human emotions. So I absolutely think there's going to be a 60% crash or even more within the next 2 years. But I think that after that crash, the price will be higher than it currently is now. And like, yeah, we could say, some people say that, well, the volatility is going to go away or reduce as more people adopt it, as bigger institutions put money in, maybe. But to me, human nature is human nature. So I think there's always going to be this volatility. So what would you say to somebody who's like afraid of adopting this because they don't want to lose their money? Like their main thing is like, well, that's scary. It's volatile. I could get hurt. What would you say to them?
You have to buy with a minimum 4 year time horizon. If you look at Bitcoin's 4 year average moving price, you're going to see that it only goes up. It goes straight up. If you buy with a short time horizon, if you let's say you have your rent money and you want to put it into Bitcoin, you want to double it by the end of this month, you're probably going to feel stupid.
Yeah.
It's either going to move sideways and you're going to have wasted all this money on fees. Let's say you have 1.5% buying and 1.5% selling. You wasted 3% on fees and it did nothing, or it went down. I think the chances of those two happening are much, much higher than the chances of it going up by the end of the month. And I'm not saying that because, historically January has been a bad month. I'm not nothing about that. It's just Bitcoin's price is all based on supply and demand. The price stays at the highs for a very, very short amount of time. And after that, the only reason why it stays at that high for a very short time is because you suddenly run out of buyers. That's it. At every price, the sellers will run out eventually, but buyers may run out first. So, for example, at $108,000, the price started dropping because buyers ran out. People with liquidity ran out. More sellers came to the market and they started selling into the market, and they basically brought the price back down. And that's going to happen. That's going to happen over and over and over again until everybody in the world completely understands Bitcoin. You have to keep in mind, just for the audience here, you have to keep in mind that most of the people who own Bitcoin don't quite understand it. I think that's the plain and simple truth. Most of the people who own Bitcoin today got lucky. For example, if I had bought Bitcoin in 2009 and I bought 1,000 Bitcoin, I would have gotten so lucky and I would have sold everything. So over time, we're going to see more and more people accumulating Bitcoin and never willing to sell. We're going to see more and more people who are completely understanding that Bitcoin is just a better form of money in every single way compared to the US dollar. And we're going to see that Bitcoin runs out at every single price. Regardless of where the price goes, let's say right now it's at 92, 93,000. It's going to run out at that price eventually. It's going to go to 94, 95, 96, and we're never going to go back to those prices. Like if you think about it, we're probably never going to go back to a $1 Bitcoin. We're never going to go back to a $10 Bitcoin because the demand is so high. And over time, the demand just keeps building and building and building until the price finally rises. If we're moving sideways, I think that's a good thing because the sellers are running out. The sellers are finding buyers, the buyers are finding sellers. Everybody's happy. But new investors don't see it that way. New investors just see it as, oh, Bitcoin is supposed to go straight up. It's supposed to keep going straight up. And if it doesn't, it's failed. I think
Yeah.
more people need to understand that the volatility is a normal part of Bitcoin's market.
Most people, and I know we'll wrap up here in 2 minutes, most people come into Bitcoin looking to get rich quick. And I think that that is the incorrect way to think about it. While
Yep.
maybe we're early enough that if, you're talking quick on like a 5 year or a 10 year horizon, then sure, absolutely. But it's really just a way for you to not get poor slowly over time with inflation. It's a way to protect yourself and to store your monetary energy into the future, which is
Yep.
so cool to think about. Like I remember times when, man, it hurt so much. Bitcoin just crashed from 20,000 down to 6,000 and the chart looked horrendous. And I'm looking at my buddy and I'm saying, and it's the January 2018, I'm saying, I think this is a buy. And he's like, I don't know, man, it looks really bad. And I'm like, yeah, it hurts. That's why I'm buying. Like that is the
Yeah.
time.
Yeah.
So yeah. And
Every
then
price is eventually going to be a rounding error. I think that's it. Every price, eventually you're going to see every single price as just irrelevant at some
100%.
point in the future.
100%. Cool. So, I want to give people an opportunity to be able to find you, whether it's to book a consult with you so they can hear from somebody who has spent a lot of time advising people about their finances, to also getting into this world, and then also just to be able to see your content on social media. So, if they wanted to do that, where would they find you?
I'm on Twitter, on X. Just search for me, Rajat Soni. I'm the one that's verified. You should probably be able to find me. I'm the bald guy with the in my picture. You'll find me. YouTube, same thing. Just search for Rajat Soni. I'm the guy who just has a bunch of Bitcoin content. Yeah, I think I'm probably the biggest Rajat Soni on both platforms, so you'll be able to find me pretty easily.
Yeah, there'll probably be multiple other impersonators looking
Yeah,
to be have your same name and similar profile, but look for the one that's either verified or has what 100,000 plus followers.
on Twitter, on Twitter, 100,000 plus. I think on YouTube, I'm almost closing in on 20K. So.
Amazing. Well, thanks so much for coming on. Do you have any other parting words or anything else you want to leave the audience with?
No, that was great. I really enjoyed it. Thank you so much for having me, Jeff. That was awesome.